I think that in the last couple of decades, there's been an increasing interest, probably since the mid-1990s, when one of the members of the National Park Service Advisory Board said, we need to broaden our understanding of American history and sort of concepts of what the nation is all about. And that includes sites of shame. And by shame, this individual meant some of the negative aspects of American history, attention to, for example, sites of slavery, sites of disaster, sites of terrorism. So, I mean, it's sort of a broad sweep, but, you know, looking at all aspects of American history. So that includes places like the Oklahoma City National Memorial, Flight 93 National Memorial, where one of the planes went down on 9/11. And also sites such as the Selma to Montgomery Historic Trail, which mark the marches of civil rights activists in the 1960s.
Well, I spent 4 years from 1997 to 2001 coming to Oklahoma City many times to immerse myself as much as I could in the aftermath of the bombing, to write my book, The Unfinished Bombing, Oklahoma City in American Memory. So I haven't tracked since that time in any systematic manner the way that Oklahoma City has recovered. I followed certainly the activities of the memorial and the way that the memorial has certainly become a living memorial, not simply a physical site. But even when I finished my book, which was 3 weeks before 9/11, you know, it was clear that people were engaged in all kinds of meaningful, challenging ways, you know, to, as Oklahomans used to say, live the new normal.
And I think one of the main points I want to make is that events like Oklahoma City are very difficult to remember because there is this effort to try and remember the victims and honor the victims and survivors and so on. But at the same time, by honoring them, it also draws attention to the killer, to the perpetrator, and so forth. So oftentimes there's a lot of tension about trying to remember the event because of what it represents to the community, but there's also pushback because it draws attention to these issues of dissent and terror. And I think that's particularly interesting in a nation like the United States, which is built on this idea of revolution. That is, we say that if the government oversteps, we should push back. In the same sense, people who do push back oftentimes are labeled as terrorists, they're called dissenters, they're kind of othered to push them away from public views. So I think that events like Oklahoma City or the Waco fire and so forth at the Branch Davidian compound have this very uneasy memory that is hard to represent in the landscape.
Well, I think the importance that we're not responsible as generations go on for the event itself. You know, Germans who are grandchildren of the World War II generation aren't responsible for the sins of their grandparents, but we are responsible for the ways in which we remember these events without sanitizing them, without domesticating them, being willing to face up to the indigestible stories in our own cultures. So remembering is an act of moral integrity.
So if we're going to claim the nation as part of our identity just for the good stuff, we have to be adults and understand our obligations and responsibilities, to understand, well, what creates horror and trauma and terrorism? How is that also part of American history? It's hard. It's hurtful. It's sort of like therapy for the nation, but that's partly the reasoning behind including the negative, our traumatic, and certainly tragic aspects of American history in our National Park Service.